Welcome back to The Scalpel. This is Dr. Keith Rose with Knives in the Box. We're here to talk to you today about politics. We're here to talk to you today about pop culture. We're here to talk to you today about the truth. Now, the first two don't always jive with the last. But the reason I'm behind this mic today is because I believe the truth matters. I believe the founding of this nation matters. A little bit about my background. We call it the scalpel because I'm a surgeon. I'm actually a plastic surgeon. And we feel like we got a scalpel and we're going to cut down to the truth. We're going to cut through a lot of the BS, a lot of the propaganda that the media is spitting out at a cyclic rate right now. We want to get to the bottom and the truth of every story so that the American people or whoever decides to listen, both of you, to this podcast, will understand that there is truth. And then my prayer, and I know it's nice prayer as well, is that you will go back and that you will do your own research. You'll do your own scholarship and start figuring out what's going on. Because we live in the greatest country in the world. Not the average or most average's country in the world, but the greatest country in the world. The average length of a constitution in the world, all comers, is 17 years. Yet ours is 232 years and running. And why is that? Why are we such a great nation? Why weren't we like the French when after the French Revolution it descended into the reign of terror? What makes us special? What makes us different? A lot of people aren't asking that question anymore. And a lot of times it's not their fault because we've been infiltrated in the media, in the schools, the educational system, in Hollywood, and in the political parties by people that care nothing for this country and everything for themselves. Sometimes I feel like it's back during the Cold War, and most of y'all won't remember the Cold War. I was a kid at the time. I remember those little drills we had to crawl under our desk and things like that, and I remember seeing President Reagan talking on TV, and they had a phrase they would always put out there. They would say, the Soviets aren't going to fire nukes at us and we're not going to fire nukes at them because that would be mutually assured destruction. Well, you know what? I think about that now. And then I think about what's going on in politics and in our country today. And it seems like the Democrats, the liberals, the progressives want mutually assured destruction of our way of life, of our Constitution. The founding document, the lifeblood, the heartbeat of this nation. The reason we went past 17 years to 232 years. If you want to be kinder, maybe they don't want mutually assured destruction, but I can promise you they want mutually assured division. And the only way to win a cold civil war, and that's what I believe we're in now, is we have to be the contrast. We have to be different. I'm not advocating for a kinetic war. We had that back in the Civil War, and it needed to be done to end slavery, but a lot of Americans died. No, this cold Civil War is for the hearts and minds of the American people. During the Cold War, it was for the hearts and minds of the other countries that were communist, and we were wanting them to understand democracy and freedom. But now we have people here dressed up not as communists, but as what they call the Democrat socialists. Kind of a soft communism. You see, a Democrat socialist is just a communist without an AK-47. And they're foisting on us, or they're pushing on us, or they're trying to make us believe that up is down is up, right is wrong is right, and America is no longer great. But we have to take back the language. We have to speak out against this revisionist history. We have to call out the commentators in the media, academics, sports, Hollywood, and the politicians that don't respect their oath of office. We have to be the contrast. Now, I'm married to a beautiful Latina. My wife is from Mexico. And we dated way back in the day. And the first time we dated, I won't get into the details, but I ended up going back overseas and I'd stopped calling. And 6 years plus later, when I met her again, she told me one thing. If you want to go out with me, don't tell me, show me. If you want to see what people value, Don't listen to their words, look at their actions. Fortunately, I showed her, and today we have an amazing family. I'm the proud father of 8 kids. If you do the math, she had 4, I had 4, we were single, we have 8 together. We still have 4 at the house, we call them the final 4. And I have 2 daughters, and I have 6 sons, and this country matters. And so what I'm trying to teach my children, what I'm trying to educate them with is history and experience. I don't want to just tell them, I want to show them. Well, right now we have political polls that are telling us one thing while doing another. And what do I mean by that? We have the media jumping in here right off the bat going, President Trump is up in the polls, but he's really down in the polls. Does that make any sense to anyone? You know what we have to stop doing? We have to stop being quiet and letting the Democrats run the media, run the educational processes, take over the Hollywood, take over the sports. We have to start calling them out and being the contrast. Basically, we need to cancel their political hall pass that we've been giving them for far too long. Well, there's some new news out today, or the other day, and it was about President Trump and the polls. Now he's got cut one up there, go.
Well, now to President Trump's approval rating on the rise. A just released ABC News Washington Post poll has his approval rating at 44%, the highest of his career, up 5 points since April. However, 53% disapprove of his overall job performance. ABC's Rachel Scott is in New Jersey, where the president is spending the weekend. Rachel, good morning.
Yes, Eva, good morning to you. The president's approval ratings at its peak, but our latest poll shows just how vulnerable the president could be ahead of the 2020 election.
Go ahead and stop. Do you listen to that? Because we have to take back the language. We have to cancel these political hall passes where we give these folks a pass on what they're saying. Hat tip Newsbusters on this. I found this when I was looking at their site. And you want to go to a great site and actually get the truth, or the way they flesh it out in the media, go to Newsbusters. They're awesome. And when they looked at this, they show President Trump's approval rate is up from 39 to 44%. They still say, did you listen to that? His approval rate is up, but his disapproval rate is at 53%. Actually, his disapproval rate is at 53%, and it is down from 54%. See, his job approval rate has also surged 5 points to 47%. While his disapproval rate at the Post, the Washington Post reporting, fell 4 points to 50%. That's a big distinction. It's up 5, it's down 4. You have a 9-point swing there, but no one's talking about that. Now, if it's President Obama, I can promise you'd be talking about it because that's liberal progressive hero, but not for Trump. And the article that Newsbuster is pretty much busting on and banging is this ABC report that I just played for you. So you see, they don't want you to understand that President Trump's approval rate is on the rise and his disapproval rate is on the descent. What they want you to understand is he's still in trouble. He's going to have a lot of problems coming in to the 2020 election. You heard it. Is he really? I mean, I heard this was the beginning of the end forever the past 2 years. We heard a lot about Trump-Russia collusion until there was no Trump-Russia collusion. Then we heard about obstruction until there was no obstruction. You see, we have to take back the language. But in understanding this, you got to understand first what they are. They call themselves progressives. Well, I'm a big student of history and experience. One of my favorite authors is a gentleman named C.S. Lewis. Pop culture might know him for several books that he's written, but he also had a good friend, a guy named J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Hobbit, and we've seen lots of movies on that. So that's who C.S. Lewis is. He's a writer, and he's a very interesting gentleman. He's written some amazing books. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Maybe you've heard of it. Tales of Narnia. C.S. Lewis had an interesting saying. He said, we all want progress. But if you're on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road in that case. The man who turns back soonest is the most progressive. That's what C.S. Lewis said. The man that turns back soonest is the most progressive. The man that admits he's wrong, sees he's on the right road, and shifts course is the most progressive. But what have I been telling you about liberal Democrats? They steal the language, and it's the opposite of what's actually going on or what actually should be. So they call themselves progressive when they're really regressive. They talk about the Declaration of Independence when they really want you to understand they're making a declaration of dependence. So how do you talk to people like that? Another one of my favorite authors, G.K. Chesterton, once observed that one should never argue with a madman because it is extremely probable that you will get the worst of it. For in many ways his mind moves all the quicker for not being delayed by the things that go with good judgment. Let me break it down simple for you. I kind of paraphrased it. Never argue with an ideological liberal. And in parentheses, I put madman. I'm paraphrasing Chesterton right now. There is no way to have a rational discussion because the liberal minds are unencumbered by logic, facts, and rational thought. They can easily flow along the lines of their ideology without any roadblocks that come from the facts of history, experience, and scholarship. And that's what we're dealing with now in this cold civil war. Unencumbered thought process by facts of history, experience, and scholarship. So how do we win this cold civil war? We have to be the contrast. We have to be different. But to be different, you need to understand what you're up against. Another one of my favorite authors is a gentleman by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer is a very famous man from history. He's a gentleman that was a pastor, spy. He was imprisoned by the Germans. There was a great book written on his life called Bonhoeffer by Eric Metaxas. I believe it won a Pulitzer Prize. And when I read that book, I was just mesmerized by this gentleman. He was thrown in prison for quite a long time and eventually executed. But when I was reading about him, I started Googling and looking at some other stuff, and I realized he had written a book called Letters from Prison. And so I was wanting to see, what does someone think about when they're sitting in prison, knowing they're going to die for doing the right thing? And if it's a big book, but you can read parts of it, you can get it, just read it when you're bored. But I will tell you, it's a fascinating book, and his insight is brilliant. And one of the things he talks about, believe it or not, is stupidity. And I think what we're dealing with right now is a lot of rampant stupidity from liberal Democrats, from progressives. And we've already seen, as C.S. Lewis says, they're not progressives in the real sense of the word, but they call themselves progressives. They're progressively taking us off the cliff as a country and working against the Constitution. But Bonhoeffer tells us how to deal with stupidity. And I'm just going to, he writes a little bit longer on this than I'm going to read on the air, but I'll read you a brief quote from him, and I think it's brilliant. He says, "Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than malice. One may protest against evil. It can be exposed, and if need be, prevented by use of force. Evil always carries within itself the germ of its own subversion, and that it leaves behind in human beings at least a sense of unease. Against stupidity we are defenseless. Neither protest nor the use of force accomplish anything here. Reasons fall on deaf ears. Facts that contradict one's prejudgment simply need not be believed. In such moments, the stupid person even becomes critical. And when facts are irrefutable, they are just pushed aside as inconsequential, as incidental. In all this, the stupid person, in contrast to the malicious one, is utterly self-satisfied and being easily irritated becomes dangerous by going on the attack. For that reason, greater caution is called for than with the malicious one. Never again will we try to persuade the stupid person with reasons, for it is senseless and dangerous." Bonhoeffer goes on to talk about more, but what he's saying here is, when you have a real stupid person, they're just going to believe what they want to believe. Their confirmational bias is through the roof. So how do we get through to the electorate, to the people that are actually out there that care, that just don't know? The way we do it is we have to be the contrast and push constitutional principles relentlessly. Because the Constitution is our deed to freedom. Bonhoeffer had one more quote that I'm going to briefly hit on because this is real important to me. He says, the ultimate test of a moral society is the kind of world that it leaves to its children. Now you hear the liberals talking about, it's the children, everything's for the children, yet everything they do isn't for the children. Abortion, I promise you, not for the children. High taxes, unsustainable spending, and deficits, not for the children. In fact, everything the liberal progressives do is in name only, because nothing is for the children and everything is against the children, our children, and grandchildren in this country. And as Bonhoeffer points out, the ultimate test of a moral society is the kind of world that it leaves to its children. Maybe that's why constitutions only last 17 years in most countries, and all but ours. And it's lasted 232 years. So that made me wonder, were we a moral society, and are we still today? Well, I was reading yesterday, and there was a new article published in the American Thinker, and again, one of my favorite sites to go and look at, by a guy, Jack Wisdom, and it's titled, America Awash in Lies and Disloyalty. Now remember, are we a moral society, and what are we going to leave to our children? Wisdom talks about, the lyrics of the Battle Hymn of the Republic by Julia Ward Howe include the words, with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. The enemies of our republic need to be transfigured. Julia Ward, when she wrote that, they were talking about the glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. That was God. You see, our founding fathers believed in God. Now, I know a lot of people don't like to talk about it. We like to say, oh, there's a separation of religion with church and state. But if you really study the founding, what they were talking about in that separation of religion between church and state had nothing to do with there's no God and don't teach about God and don't be moral. It was talking about there should be no state-sponsored religion. You see, on the first Bible ever printed in English in the United States, when it was printed in the colonies, it had on the inside of it a congressional endorsement. And it was written in there by printer, Holy Scriptures for the use of schools. You see, the founders knew one thing. They knew to have a moral society, a just society, so that all people are created equal and given inalienable rights by God. They knew that because of the Scriptures and because of preaching and teaching. And we'll talk more on that later. Let's go back to this article. So he starts off on America Awash in Lies and Disloyalty, and he talks about, Jack Wisdom's talked about the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and then he goes right to Representative Ilhan Omar tweeting her thoughts about the Fourth, stated, today gives us all a chance to reflect on how far we have come as a country and how much further we have to go to achieve full equality for all people. We're at a tipping point for progress. There it is, that word again, progress. This rebuke of our socio-political system contrasted with her joyful dancing at the Somalia Independence Day celebration on July 1st. Her tweet on that occasion included the words Somalia, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Hanalolato, and that's my best guess, or long live Somalia. Even though Somalia has been in a hotbed of undemocratic rule and civil strife since its independence from Great Britain in 1960. This is a woman now wagging her finger at the American people who came here from a refugee camp in Kenya after fleeing Somalia, receiving asylum in the U.S. for her family's radical dislocation. Yet she is unable to unashamedly say, long live America. I've spent time in Somalia. I've worked in Ethiopia. I'm a craniofacial surgeon, and I've operated on children from Somalia. I've talked to the parents through translators and heard about the horrific conditions there. And this congressional representative, Ilhan Omar, tells you how you are wrong and how far we need to go on the 4th of July, our Independence Day, while celebrating the Somalian Independence Day. And let me just tell you something. Somalia is anything but independent. It is a war-torn country. And you know what, Miss Omar, this isn't personal. This is just truth. Somalia is a dumpster fire. At least that's what all the Somalians that I dealt with talked to me about. So while you're saying long live Somalia, it's long live Somalia, but you don't want to live there. You live in the United States of America. Yet you can't say long live America, the place that gave you a home, that allowed you to ascend to a position in the United States Congress. You swore an oath. And we're going to show you the contrast. You know, this is the same Ilhan Omar that said, quote, Donald J. Trump isn't human. She also wrote in a letter in 2016 that ISIS recruits should be shown leniency. They should be treated leniently. You know, these people that back in the time were wearing orange, were executing guys in orange jumpsuits by cutting their heads off, burning them with gasoline. You know how they recruit ISIS members? They show them the jihadi videos of people being executed. They call it, quote unquote, moosh porn in the military. Because that's what gets them excited. And Miss Omar stands for those people, but she won't stand for our flag. I remember when President Trump had the first travel ban, and Miss Omar virtue signals with no ban act. Except Obama's travel bans were 16 times worse than Trump's travel ban. You want to understand what a liberal progressive is? Just look up the word hypocrite. It's right before the word idiot. Uneducated. Shameful. But let's not let facts get in the way of the actual truth. You know, Newsbusters called her out. They had an article that was written by Washington Post. It was a little puff piece on Miss Omar. And I love Newsbusters because Newsbusters sees it for what it is, and then they write it for what it is. Not the Washington Post, or as I've heard it called, I think Mark Levin famously coined the Washington Compost, because that's really all it's good for. We have a paper here where I live in South Texas that's been taken over by USA Today. I just call it the fish wrapper. And if you have a bird, then you can put it at the bottom of your bird cage. But that's really all it's good for. Well, the Washington Post is good because you have an article by Tim Graham in Newsbusters that was yesterday. He says 2 Sundays ago, Washington Post front page mourned how 2 slaughtered Scandinavian women were a weapon for the far right. On July 7th, the Post front page frets over 3,500 words on the complicated American story of Ilhan Omar. The Congresswoman's refugee narrative was made for the rancor and racial division of the Trump era. Remember, they're not here to unite. They're here to divide. Mutually assured division. The article goes on. You can smell it in the way Greg Jaffe and Suad, and I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce this guy's last name. We'll just say Suad M, proclaim Omar's ascent raises something bigger, a battle over the American story. Who was entitled to tell it and how it would be told. You see, if you are intersectional, if you are anything but a white male, as in Miss Omar's case, an African or Somalian American female, you get to tell your own story. Your critics aren't entitled to tell your story with truth and experience. That's the translation of this article. It goes on, in the midst of hailing her on terms as America's hope and the president's worst nightmare, the Post runs through the scandalous history. The all about the Benjamins tweet about Israel, the somebody did something sneer about 9/11 at a CARE fundraiser, and her writing a letter urging leniency for 9 Somalis convicted of trying to travel to Syria to join the Islamic State. We just talked about that. At least the Post noted she's not careful with the facts when she's running down American racism and injustice. 5 years earlier, Omar told the students she was working with as a Minneapolis city councilwoman who asked her to report back on problems with the court, She recalled encountering a sweet old African-American lady who had been arrested for stealing a $2 loaf of bread to feed her starving 5-year-old granddaughter. You see, the liberals are great with these anecdotal stories. The problem is they're never backed up with facts. Because the article goes on, after spending the weekend in jail, the woman was led to the courtroom and fined $80, a penalty she couldn't pay. I couldn't control my emotions, Omar continued. Probably much higher. Because when you hear her talk, she's like, I couldn't control my emotions. Because she likes to get all pressured speech like all liberals when they're lying. Because I couldn't understand how a room full of educated adults could do something so unjust. BS, she recalled yelling in the courtroom. She was in the courtroom. She yelled, bull poop. Laughter rippled through the auditorium, then silence. The only problem is, this article goes on to point out that Omar's story echoed the plot of Les Miserables. If true, it's probably embellished. City officials said that police aren't allowed to arrest people for shoplifting unless there's a likelihood of violence or further crime. Typically, shoplifters are sentenced to attend a 3-hour class. Well, eventually, Omar was asked by an actual reporter, and she said she may have flubbed some facts. She might have had a prior, Omar said. I'm not sure. The details might not have all matched, but that's what I remember. You know, Miss Omar, you know what the American people remember? Because we have this thing called the internet. We remember your lies. We remember your embellishments. We remember your hyperbole. We remember the fact that you don't care about the country that gave you a home from your war-torn dumpster fire country. You're now an American citizen. Understand the history and act like it. And if you're not happy, I'm sure you can head back to Somalia. Nothing prevents the flight from the United States of America to that country. There's no ban on leaving. I'm sure you can find your way back. Don't let the door hit you as you leave. Now, returning to the article we started with that talks about Miss Omar, and I apologize for the segue, but I wanted to unpack her because she needed her excessive, and I mean excessive, political and moral baggage unpacked. I'm not going to talk about the fact that she married her brother. I'm not going to talk about the fact that she married someone else and still files joint tax returns with her first husband up to 2014 and 2015. You can go look that up for yourselves. So we're going to go back here. The article continues, another enemy of our republic. I love the way this guy talks because, trust me, if you're fighting against our republic verbally, you're an enemy of this republic. This is a cold civil war. He says another enemy of our republic is Colin Kaepernick, who I talked about in the other last podcast. Now, he is repudiating the Betsy Ross flag in the name of some radical version of civil rights. Ignorant Colin obviously doesn't know that Betsy Ross was a Quaker and an abolitionist. The Quakers had an extreme view of liberty in Christ that readily lent itself to the abolitionist cause. Further, does Colin even know that Frederick Douglass, one of the greatest black spokesmen for abolition, often quoted the Declaration of Independence as an important document in the abolitionist cause? Has any of these mental giants, I love this guy's prose, who are taking knees, ever read Carl Becker's classic book on the Declaration of Independence, which clearly reports that the original phrase, life, liberty, and property, taken from the writings of John Locke, was changed by Thomas Jefferson to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because he, that is Thomas Jefferson, believed that inclusion of the word property would seem to justify slavery, i.e. the treatment of human beings as property. You got people yelling. The article goes on. I highly recommend you read. It's from the American Thinker. But you have people out there screaming and yelling. Jefferson had slaves. No. Jefferson did some things because I believe Jefferson and our founding fathers realized that slavery was just a reality at that time. But they were building something that would end slavery someday by being the contrast. And that basis for being the contrast was the Bill of Rights, was the Constitution, was the Declaration of Independence. and it provided documents based off of biblical teachings. And I'm just saying that because as I study this, that's what I see. These were men of faith. They were men of virtue. They weren't perfect, because please show me anyone that is, because I haven't found them yet. So I think that's real important, because at the end of this article, he sums it up. Have these naysayers experienced an ounce of gratitude toward the country of their birth? Are they aware that the Northwest Ordinance passed in the 1780s banned slavery from the territory newly won from the British? Do they understand that more than 300,000 white men perished in the Civil War to free the slaves, and that the Republicans spent enormous national wealth to maintain troops in the South until 1877? Do they have a shred of understanding about the importance of our intervention and success in World War II and the commitment of independence of the third world countries that was deeply connected with that victory? Or of our important role in bringing down the collapse of the USSR, that is communist Russia? Now, I don't think liberals know and or care, because again, I will refer you to Arguing with a Madman or the Treatise on Stupidity. But I'll tell you, it's not just the folks that I feel like are uneducated or have an agenda. We have educated folks. We have educated folks like this guy, Michael Eric Dyson, who's a renowned scholar. This chucklehead, and I'm calling you a chucklehead, Mr. Dyson, because you know better and you choose to just spout propaganda. At least based on your biography, you should know better. You're educated, sir. Cut 3, go.
Can you explain why this particular flag, this symbol, is so offensive to some?
Right. Well, it hails from the revolutionary period, of course, of this nation's founding, which was deeply embroiled in, enslavement, the owners of slaves, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and the like. But also, it's the recent use of this flag that has been most opprobrious. Right-wing white supremacists have used it as a rallying cry for their own cause. And none of these flags are kind of set in stone, right? It's depending upon the culture in which you live, the moral ecology of the time. So right now, this flag has been used by people who want to pummel African Americans, Latinx, Jews, and other people, neo-Nazis who want to claim that they have the true copyright on American identity. So why not choose a flag that is representative of everybody? The diversity of identities, ideologies, and people of color and mainstream people who happen to exist in this country. That's the kind of blowback against the use of this particular flag.
What do you make of those who say, listen, why let those sort of right-wing white supremacist groups win? Why not reclaim the flag, if you will?
Hold on just a second. We're going to listen to his answer in just a second, but I just have to call him out on his moral ecology, the Latinx. See, they won't even say Latinos or Latinas. They're now Latinx. I speak Spanish. My wife speaks fluent Spanish. I'm fairly fluent in Spanish, and I tell you there's no Latinx. No, because we're creating new words to fit our agenda. And this professor at Georgetown, anyone sending their kids to Georgetown, pull them out now. You're wasting your money. Just wants to lecture us on moral ecology. Well, I got some moral ecology for you coming up. Keep going.
Anything coming from the right about that? I don't hear them going, hey, this is not.
And you think the onus is on the right to do that? Well,
yeah, because the left is responding. They're saying this flag is problematic. They're giving their interpretation. It's similar to what the Confederacy has done. They lost the war, but they won the battle of interpretation. This is waging a war of interpretation on the landscape of American popular culture for the collective mindset of America. And people have their right to weigh in as they choose. But the reality is that this flag has represented something that is offensive and opprobrious, and if people want to reclaim it, then do so. It's like the argument about the statues. The statues are there for education. I don't hear people talking about Robert E. Lee as a moment of educating us about the viciousness of white supremacy. So were that to occur, it would be great. It just hasn't happened.
What about the argument that some have made, this is PC culture run amok, if you will? If Nike wants to put this flag on their shoe, why are people so upset about it?
Yeah, because, words matter, symbols matter too. Why don't we wear a swastika for July 4th? Because, I don't know, it makes a difference. The cross burning on somebody's lawn. Why don't we just have a Nike, celebration of the cross? Well, because those symbols are symbols of hate. So we can take...
Stop. I can't take this chucklehead anymore. Mr. Dyson, you're an embarrassment. You're an embarrassment to educated men everywhere. And you either don't know history or you choose to change it. You talk about the Confederacy. Well, you should know that's pretty much the Democrat Party. You do know that the Republicans spent an enormous amount of national wealth, tax dollars, to maintain troops in the South till 1877. You don't recognize the greatness of this nation. You just want to use a bunch of flowery words. Most of them where educated people actually listen don't make a whole lot of sense in a sing-song way to get your point across and appear highly intelligent, yet your words are moronic. The Betsy Ross flag, you just compared that to a Nazi swastika. Really? Or a burning cross? I looked this guy up because I really wanted to understand what he was thinking. Where did he come from? Just maybe he's uneducated. I mean, Ilhan Omar, I'm not giving her a political hall pass, but she's from Somalia. She was raised in a radical culture. She came to Kenya, then she came here, and she refuses to embrace this nation as great. But Mr. Dyson, you're a, quote, renowned scholar. You're an ordained Baptist minister. So I'm going to speak to you one Christian to another. They also describe you as a public intellectual born in Detroit, Michigan. You have innovative scholarship combining cultural criticism and biography. I don't know, which biographies are you using? The one of James Armistead, the first double agent in the Revolutionary War, a black slave who was one of the primary reasons that we're a free country today? Did you lift that man and his family up for his selfless sacrifice? Or did you just try to drone on and talk about stuff that's not only not true, but basically you like to just hear yourself talk? And you have contemporary issues, you're about contemporary issues in the African American community. In your most recent book on April 4th, your most recent book is April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr.'s death and how it changed America. Mr. Dyson, I don't know a lot about Martin Luther King. I just know what my father told me. Why? Because my father's a minister. He marched with Pastor King. My father was also the pastor of a mostly black church in New York City. So when I speak to you, sir, I'm not speaking down to you. I'm speaking to you as a preacher's kid, and you're an ordained Baptist minister. Do you understand our founding? Do you understand that John Weiss, who is a pastor in Massachusetts, is one of the top 6 intellectuals that they used when crafting our Constitution and the Declaration of Independence? The Sons of Liberty reprinted his books from 1710, his messages from 1710 and 1717. There was a reprint in 1772. That's where we get our phrases. All men are created equal and endowed by their creator. I mean, you are an ordained minister, and I looked, you've taught at seminary. Do you not understand the founding of our country? How about this, Mr. Dyson? Instead of coming on and talking about burning crosses and swastikas, why don't you talk about Francis Hopkinson? He was one of our first federal judges. He was actually a choir director. He was someone that he made the first hymns of Psalms. He said, hey, David sang when he prayed, we should have a psalm book on the hymns. But he was also the designer of the first flag. And he was an abolitionist. He did not believe in slavery. But you're not going to lift up our founding. You're going to lift yourself up. Well, here, let me educate you a little bit more because clearly you don't understand what makes this country great. But reading some of the stuff that you've done, I think you want to know. But there's a part of you, sir, that refuses to recognize America is great because America is good. The founders knew this. I'd like to think that the founders read the Psalms, because I do know that Francis Hopkins did. He wrote songs to them. And if you look in Psalms 144, it says, David talks, save me, rescue me from the power of my enemies. Their mouths are full of lies. They swear to tell the truth, but lie instead. Goes on to say in Psalms 144, verse 12, may our sons flourish in their youth like well-nurtured plants. May our daughters be like graceful pillars carved to beauty in a palace. David was talking about how people will lie about you. They'll swear to tell the truth and they'll lie, but he wants his sons and daughters. He prays his sons and daughters flourish. That word flourish is to grow. Why don't you grow? Why don't you read history? Why don't you study it instead of spout propaganda? Instead of pull out strategic talking points to stir up controversy, why don't you stir up patriotism? You're at Georgetown University. Georgetown was a great hangout in the day for George Washington. Remember? The one you say he was a slave owner. Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner. Then why are you teaching at a university that's located in Washington, D.C., named after our first president? I think you need to go back and look at George Washington's letter written in 1796, his farewell letter, when he talked about religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain that would man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. Think about this. Religion and morality are indispensable supports. Our founding fathers knew it. They knew we could not be great and good unless we had basic morality. And that morality came from religion. You're a Baptist, ordained Baptist minister. I would think you would kind of understand that. Washington knew what he was talking about. He also said, and let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason, and experience, both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in the exclusion of religious principle. See, our founding fathers weren't about religious doctrine, sir. They were about religious principle. So, Mr. Dyson, you go sit in the chair, put the dunce hat on, pick up your Bible, pick up the founding documents, and why don't you understand why America is great and why America is good? Instead of lobbing talking points that not only make no sense, that inflame the rhetoric, that push a cold civil war on a society that lives in the greatest country on the world, a shining light for everyone to see. Mr. Dyson, I am disappointed, but I believe, at least from looking at your biography, that you will finally understand what truth and experience are. But that's going to take work. That's going to take culling. That's going to take understanding history and experience. Because in the arena of truth, you are not a warrior. You are merely a jester in the court of propaganda. This is Dr. Keith Rose and Knives. We're back for round 2. And talking about the news yesterday, something very unique, I kind of excited about. President Trump and the Justice Department dropped a nuclear bomb on the liberal progressives in the form of politically connected financier Jeffrey Epstein is now in federal custody over new. When they say new, that means there were some old already. We'll get to that. New sex trafficking charges. We find this in Market Watch. Federal prosecutors recently filed papers in Florida arguing the non-prosecution agreement Epstein secured a decade ago So it'd be like 10 years ago. Who was president? Okay, yeah. From then Miami U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta, now a member of the Trump cabinet, not in the Justice Department, I don't believe, must not be undone. Well, wealthy financier and registered sex offender Jeffrey Epstein is due in court following an arrest in New York on sex trafficking charges involving allegations that date to the early 2000s, according to law enforcement officials. Epstein, a wealthy hedge fund manager who once counted as friends former President Bill Clinton, Great Britain's Prince Andrew, and President Trump, was taken into federal custody Saturday and expected to appear Monday in Manhattan federal court, 3 law enforcement officials told the Associated Press. Basically, here's what's going on. This guy is a serial pedophile. I mean, he is a bad person. He is a documented serial pedophile. He got to plea bargain out against this. This guy has been tied to Menendez. You remember his trial. He's been on what they called his plane, the Lolita Express. He had an island, I believe they called it something like Orgy Island. I don't know. I think Clinton visited it about 25 times. I'll tell you who didn't visit it and who didn't ride on this guy's plane, and that's President Trump. But they're going to put a picture of President Trump and this guy on every article that you see because, again, liberal progressives aren't interested in the fact that little girls were abused. They're just interested in the fact what they can do to tarnish this duly elected president. I have it on good authority, and I know some folks in Washington, D.C., and I know some folks close to the president. I don't know the president personally, but I do know that he wasn't involved in the shenanigans, and I use that word shenanigans in the dirtiest, slimiest way of this pedophile. But I think to understand how bad this guy is and to put it in the right context, I think you need to hear a little bit of it from an article posted in the Miami Herald. It starts out with a little video and some of the victims talking, and I want you to listen to it, especially you with daughters out there. You have that cut pulled up nice?
We were underage. We were little girls.
I was 16.
I was 16.
I started going to him when I was like 14 turning 15.
If you think at 14, $200, that's a lot of money at 14 years old. I mean, that's a lot of money now.
Stop. I don't want to. It goes on and on. It goes on for about 20-some minutes, and it gets very graphic. And you can go and actually see that article, and you can listen to it. It's in the Miami Herald. It's recent. But basically, this billionaire preyed on young girls. He spent the bulk of his adult life building relationships with the world's most powerful men. And if you look at his flight logs from 2001 to 2003, Bill Clinton flew on Epstein's private plane dubbed the Lolita Express by the press 26 times. Of course, he was arrested in July 26, 2006. But the federal tax records show that he donated $25,000 to the Clinton Foundation that year. So he gets arrested, donates some money to the Clinton Foundation, and ultimately, he's freed. He has a plea deal. He's free. Nothing changes in this man's life. But you know what changed? The lives of the girls that he abused. And there's absolutely, it's evil. You see, George Washington talked about religion and morality. And I can tell you, with a lot of progressive Democrats and Republicans, religion and morality don't figure into the equation. But they did in the building and the founding of this country. And if we want to make this country great again, we're going to have to get back to the founding principles. You know, this isn't the first time you've had a sex scandal with Clinton. Clinton had so many sex scandals while he was president, before he was president. I mean, he used the power of his office to, well, you know what happened with Monica Lewinsky. You see, the politicians and the people that support them, the liberal progressive Democrats, don't care about anything but themselves. They're all about mutually assured division or destruction. They don't care. This country's not great. Not when you have enough money to put underage girls on a plane and fly them to an island and have a former president join you. But you see in the media not a lot of pictures of Clinton with Epstein right now. At least I didn't when I was looking last night. You see a lot of pictures of Trump with Epstein, trying to try Trump to Epstein. But I can tell you, that dog won't hunt, as we say down here in Texas. So you have the academics that we talk about trying to divide this country. You have the people that support the politicians trying to divide this country. And then, of course, you have the people that are politicians trying to divide this country. No one's better at that than Spartacus himself, Cory Booker. Yet I found an interesting article in the Boston Herald, Democrat parties, and it says Booker, shameless at the border. Now, we talked about the border last time. And the bottom line of this article is the Democrat Party position on immigration is most recently personified in 2020 presidential candidate U.S. Senator Cory Spartacus Booker. They don't say Spartacus, I do. Who tweeted this week about his trip across the border to help 5 migrant women with their asylum claims. The thread is light on details as to whether or not these women actually have valid legal claims to the asylum in the United States, and heavy on unsubstantiated and dramatic details of the cruelty of the process at the American border. Just typical more pablum. When you don't love this country, you create division. You create diversion by going down there, don't talk about the actual facts, and then just firebomb the conditions. You know, the conditions that started under Barack Hussein Obama. But don't let those pesky facts get in the way. Let's just go down and tell people how bad it is. I mean, Booker's polling in the single digits right next to his IQ. And it just gets worse. But I'll tell you, I see the politicians doing it, and I kind of understand it because it breeds a lot, especially on the liberal side, self-serving, narcissistic people. They just seem to flaunt to politics. What's interesting, though, is we have some sports heroes that are also Patriot zeros. The most recently being Rapinoe. Who's Rapinoe? Well, Rapinoe is this young lady who plays for America's World Cup team. Now, I'm an athlete, or I used to be. I'm a little older now. Nothing special, but I played in college. I played for Baylor University. I was blessed to be able to play in 3 bowl games. I know a lot of athletes. Some of my fellow teammates I started my last 2 years went on to play pro. And they're great guys. But you know what? When I played back then, and it was in the 80s, so we were knocking cows and dinosaurs off the field, we were patriots. I can't even imagine someone knocking our country. But evidently, if you're a liberal Democrat and you really want to get a lot of play, be a Rapinoe. Have the ability to live in the greatest, freest country in the world, to play in the World Cup for Team USA, to wear that on your uniform, and then just beat it to death in the media. She wants to let you know she's not proud to be an American, and F Trump, and I'm not going to the White House. Okay, you can kick a little ball between a goal and color your hair purple. I am so impressed. What are you going to... I wouldn't say your kids and grandkids because it doesn't appear you've decided that's probably not in your future unless you adopt, and that's cool. This lady identifies as a lesbian or is a lesbian, and that's fine. I'm not judging you. What I'm judging is the way you treat my country. I don't care if you're black, white, purple, gay, straight, trans, whatever everyone's calling themselves nowadays. But what I do care about is this nation that gave you the opportunity to reach the pinnacle of athleticism and gives you the right to bash our country. And a lot of people died to give you that right to spit in their face. I just don't think it's probably the best use of your time, but hey, what do I know? Everyone eventually grows up. So we go from the sports heroes, let's go to Hollywood. Now, we talked about the border, and I know a lot more about the border than most, I think, because I live down in this area. But there was a comedian that I once used to watch with my wife, a Hispanic comedian by the name of Fluffy. And he now, his name is Iglesias, has a TV show called, oddly enough, Mr. Iglesias. So, that's his last name. It's Gabe Iglesias, former Gabriel Iglesias, which people call Fluffy, I believe, who's a comedian, and now he has a Netflix comedy series. So this gentleman who starts out as a comedian, and I remember at the time he's a pretty large guy, and he would call himself Fluffy, and he would make fun of himself, he'd make fun of comedy, make fun of a lot of things. The guy was very funny. And then he's given a Netflix comedy series. So how's he going to use it? Is he going to use it for good? Or is he going to use it for making stupid statements? Cut.
Whatever we got.
Okay, here's another one. Mikey, finish this Ronald Reagan quote. Mr. Gorbachev,
tear down this wall. Man, it feels good to say that.
Imagine that, a Republican president who thought walls were a bad idea.
Stop. I can't take it anymore. I really can't. Actually, I can. I'll just call these guys out and use them for foils. Hey, Fluffy, I actually played this for my wife, who is from Mexico and grew up on the border. She can't visit her family now because of the violence in Mexico. We're going to get to the border. We're going to really break it down in one of our podcasts, and I'm going to give you guys some more inside baseball than you've seen in a while. But I'll just tell you, it's very violent. And a lot of these kids that are coming across the border are being recycled back across the border by the cartels to be used for someone else crossing the border. There's articles and reports out on that now. I guess you could have used your pinnacle of success to bring, the American people and point them, even using humor, to the fact that there's a real problem on the border. But no, let's just beat on the president. Hey, Fluffy, my wife has a word for you. And I was thinking about this, and I asked my wife, when she said it, I said, baby, I don't know if I can say that on a podcast. I want to be family friendly. She said, por pendejo. Fluffy, you'll know what that is. Be thankful that this is a country that gave you the opportunity to showcase your humor and become a celebrity instead of becoming a spokesman for the gastric sleeve. You have no idea what you've been given in this country. And to be used by the left to beat on our president, who, since he has been president, there is record low unemployment in the Hispanic community. Just those pesky facts. And do you know that as wages have increased and cost and median income in households have increased, it's increased higher in the African American and Hispanic Latin communities by double digits than the white communities. And I think that's great, because what it means is President Trump's economic policies are working, so people have more money to be able to get a Netflix subscription so they can watch you, so you can make more money and make fun of the guy. That's the whole reason you're making more money right now. Do you see how that makes no sense? But I guess making no sense is the story of the liberal Democrat, the progressives. You probably wouldn't get invited to all those parties if you actually spoke the truth, if you actually had the cojones, the huevos, as you say in your show, to speak truth to truth instead of BS, to be a part of a group of people that only want to divide this country and not unite us. But we have history and experience. We will be the contrast, and we aren't going anywhere. It's Dr. Keith Rosenhuis. Thanks for spending your morning with us. Keep freedom rolling.